Hi, I'm Herb Stevens, the skiing weatherman. Today I'm at Sunday River, Maine, where my cameraman David Hewitt and I have just taped the first installment of this season of the Skiing Weatherman. But we've come up with a new feature for this winter sports season. It's called Weather Weenies. Every week I'm going to cut a little video here in the parking lot where we're taping the show and basically break down what's happened in the weather of late across North America that affects skiers and riders and what's coming up in the future. Not a lot of makeup here, no talking heads. This is going to be down-to-earth weather talk. And for those of you who are weather weenies, and you know who you are, and I'm one, I think you might enjoy this stuff. So let's start by talking about what's happened the last couple of months, because in the month of October, most of the United States was colder than normal, and everybody got excited about the skiing season and the riding season. And then November came along, and by and large, it was warmer than normal. What is there to make of that difference between those 2 months? And let's not forget the Pacific Northwest, by the way, because that's the only place in America and in North America that's had good snowfall leading up to the start of the season. Why did they get snowfall? We'll start there. Well, in the month of November and also late October, Alaska's up here in the corner. We had a big low pressure center at the surface and aloft over Alaska, and it sat there and it just spun energy off the Pacific Ocean into the Northwest. And they got snow in the Cascades of Oregon and Washington. They got a lot of snow up here at Whistler as well. A couple of weeks ago, Whistler had 125 inches in 7 days, and needless to say, they had a bit of an avalanche problem as well. So everybody's excited about the season up here in the Northwest, but nothing's happened elsewhere in the country. When you have a cold October, that typically correlates quite well, looking at past Octobers that have been colder than normal, to a colder than normal winter in the eastern 2/3 of the country. That's what I'm forecasting, and I have a lot of faith in that forecast because it was cold in the month of October. The month of November, interestingly enough, it's right up against, and in many cases, the start of the winter sports season. It has virtually nothing to do as far as a correlation with what happens during the winter. And that's because November is more of a transitional month. You've got the fight between cold air to the north and summer's hanging on in the south. And the month of November tells you less about the winter than the month of October does. So where have we been the past couple of weeks, and why has it been so warm, especially in the eastern half of the United States? We've had a large trough of low pressure covering most of the west, and that's helped support the snow in the northwest. And conversely, we've had a ridge of high pressure at the upper levels and at the surface most of the time. And next week, by the way, I'll have bigger pens over the eastern half of the country. And this is where the temperatures have been warmer than normal. Snowmakers haven't had much in the way of temperatures to work with. There's been very little in the way of natural snow, although a couple days ago, right after Thanksgiving, we had a storm that produced some pretty good snow here in northern New England, from Jay Peak across to Bretton Woods and over here to Sunday River, where they got 6 or 8 inches of snow up on top. And when you take a look at the Skiing Weatherman report next week, you'll see it looks like midwinter because there's some natural snow up there. But this is the pattern we've had. It's called a negative PNA, and PNA stands for Pacific North American Teleconnection. And a negative PNA suggests you have a trough in the west, and they're happy about that, and a ridge in the east. But changes are happening. You might not think typhoons have anything to do with the weather for skiers and riders, but a typhoon, and it's way off this map, just in the last several days was headed toward the Philippines, but it recurved and went northeast out to sea in much the same fashion that we see hurricanes recurve along the east coast of North America. When a typhoon of that size recurves and heads northeast out into the Pacific Ocean, 6 to 10 days later, you usually end up with a trough of low pressure in the eastern third of the country, and it's coming. There are other things that have signaled this change in the pattern, including stratospheric warming at the top 1% of the atmosphere, way up over the Arctic. When it gets warm there, for reasons that aren't fully understood, 2 or 3 weeks later, the eastern half of the country gets cold. And we had a really good stratospheric warming episode about 3 weeks ago. That too lends credence to this notion that a trough is going to get established in the east. That's going to happen later in the week, about a week after Thanksgiving. Before it does, however, we're going to see a storm form down here in the Gulf of, well, wait a minute, that's supposed to be Texas. So this is the Gulf of Mexico. And this storm is going to head northeastward. Right now, it looks as though the storm track is going to be just east of the Appalachians. And what that means is with counterclockwise flow around the low, you'll have warm air coming up the coast. And most of the Northeast is going to get mostly rain out of that system. But once the storm goes up into the Maritimes, and that'll happen about Friday or so, just about a day after you see this, cold air will come in from Canada For the first time, we'll have a tap into Arctic air, which is off the northern part of this map. And we're going to see some very good snowmaking temperatures for snowmakers from Quebec and New England all the way down to the Carolinas. And when that cold air goes across the Great Lakes right now, because of the warm November, are warmer than normal. That cold air is going to set off a pretty good lake effect episode in the lee of the lakes and into the northern and central Appalachians the weekend, about 10 days after Thanksgiving. But more importantly, on a large scale, we're going to see a trough established in the east. I think it's going to stay there for at least a couple of weeks. And with the southern stream of the jet stream down here from the Pacific Ocean across Mexico and into the Gulf of Mexico, this jet stream is enhanced right now because we have an El Nino out in the Pacific Ocean. That's good stuff if the El Nino doesn't get too warm. If it gets really strong, it basically floods all of America with warm air and you get a really crappy ski season. It's a weak to moderate El Nino right now. It's going to jack up the energy in this jet stream. That's going to interact with the cold air that's going to get established over the northeast and over the mid-Atlantic region. And you're going to see a lot of natural snow from the eastern Great Lakes to the East Coast over the course of the first 3 weeks of December, which bodes well for the holiday season. What about out west? Let's finish with a few thoughts about that. The southern branch of the jet being enhanced, as I said, that means good things for the southern Sierra, for the southern Rockies, for the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The line of demarcation this year is roughly going to be Interstate 70. North of that, you're going to see a ridge dominate much of the winter. As the southern branch keeps roaring along, it's going to be tougher to get natural snow in the northern Rockies and in BC than it will be in the southwestern part of this country. But the good news is, short term, those who have had very little winter weather in the eastern half of the country, it's coming, it'll be here, and really enforced by the week of December 7th. That means good snowmaking, lake effect snow, coastal storms, and it's going to be a stormy and snowy December for most of the eastern half of the country. The southwest will get their fair of snow, and in the northwest, where they get off to a really good start, they're going to have to glide on what they've had because snow is going to be a little harder to come by in that part of North America for the next several weeks. That's the first installment of Weather Weenie. We'll have more for you next week. Take it easy.